Week 2 of the first ever Overwatch League West Pro-Am is in the history books. While the results themselves maybe aren't that surprising, the games themselves were fun to watch. Many of the league's new exciting rosters took the stage this week, giving us a fun preview of what's to come not only for the rest of this tournament, but for the regular season as well. For those who might have missed the action, I humbly invite you to join me for a recap of Week 2. Y'all really seem to like my highlight reel from last week, so we're going back for round 2. First things first, the Pro-Am tournament picture is now completed. Boston, LA Gladiators, Houston, and Toronto will be joining the Shock, Mayhem, Reign, and Spitfire for a single elimination tournament next weekend with $50,000 on the line. A preview of that tournament bracket will come later in the week. For now, let's take a look at how this week got us here. On day 1, we started with the Toronto Defiant taking on Twisted Minds, and it went about how you'd expect. Twisted Minds, while a fun story, really stood no chance here. The whole gimmick with Twisted Minds is playing lots of Pharah, D.Va, and Mercy, and in the words of Speedily, we don't think Pharah is a good hero. So when push came to shove, the Hydron Cassidy proved to be way too much as Twisted Minds simply could not get anything done. He gave us an excellent series in what proved to be an easy win for this new Defiant team. Ultraviolet and the DPS had their way, simple as that. Match 2 of day 1 featured the Washington Justice against Team Peps, and they secured a solid 2-0. Map 1 had a decent 3-round back and forth going. Both sides showing us some good individual plays, and we even got the Reinhardt ego duel. It was great to see Ben Best back on a signature Rein, and when it came down to it, the Justice just got stronger as the series went on, and the big headline being Flora, as it seems that he was finally freed from his shackles on NYXL as he put out an incredible series on the Hanzo, and if it wasn't him, either Terra or Alpha were cleaning it up. Pretty good series and a great start for the Pro-Am with the Washington Justice. Match 3 of day 1 featured one of the biggest bangers of the Pro-Am so far. The Houston Outlaws played the Toronto Defiant in a battle to decide the fate of Group D. In the series, it started how Houston fans expected it to. Pure dominance on the first round of Nepal. But the Defiant showed this wasn't going to be some walk in the park, because from here on out, it was the Hydron show. His stalling on the Symmetra and his timely picks on the Hanzo led to Toronto coming back to take map 1. And with how Blizzard World started, it seemed like this was going to be a sweep. The real story on Houston's attack proved to be how they just couldn't help Fearless. Ultraviolet was focusing him time after time with both his Biotic Grenade and Sleep Dart. Houston really had a hard time cracking this and figuring out a solution, so they could only get to around the end of point B before stalling out. And this is when it seemed like the series was genuinely over with how frustrated they looked. But then, right during the final hour, the Outlaws adjusted. The help onto Fearless was a lot better. Additionally, their individual stars started making a lot of big plays. There were a few close calls throughout for sure, but whenever a map-deciding play needed to happen, it went the way of Houston. Be it through focusing the back line with EMP, or Violet and Pelican getting big kills, the Outlaws prevailed. Houston took it to a map 3, where we'd hoped to get an epic conclusion to a pretty crazy game. But unfortunately, the vibes were totally killed. Push was very much one-sided in favor of the Outlaws. While I'm unsure if it really makes that much of a difference with how much of a blowout the map was, Toronto chose to sub in Sam for Hydron. Hydron up to this point was having an excellent series, and Sam literally got subbed in just to play Cassidy anyway, so a lot of people feel that it was a pretty pointless substitution. It was a pretty big bummer of an ending, but at least the first few maps were pretty entertaining. Great series from Hydron, Violet, and others, and definitely worth a watch. Next, the LA Gladiators took on Wisp. The thing we all wanted to know is if the Scrimbucks were real for the LA Gladiators. Are they really not good? Well, they certainly proved otherwise, even if it was just against a contenders team. It started off maybe suggesting that they were struggling, as Wisp actually took some really good fights with their talented young roster, and the Glads had a lot of mishaps. Wisp really made both rounds of Nepal competitive, and they were just a few fights away from possibly taking that map. But the Glads' individual talent shined through, and as they got settled in, they ended up cruising to a victory. Kevster's Tracer was great as usual, and Dante played well both on the Ramatra and Winston, which is a great sign if you're a Glads fan that's maybe worried about him solo tanking this year. That's all there is to say there, so day 1 ended with the Outlaws winning a somewhat entertaining game over the NYXL. There's been a lot of rumors, just like with Glads, that New York kinda stink. but they actually did show some good fight in this series despite the 2-0. Lijiang Tower felt pretty winnable throughout. The Ramatra comp felt pretty decent, with Fitz making a lot of big plays on the Sombra and the Cassidy. He did his best with some help from Psycho and Creative, but it just wasn't meant to be. Every time it felt like the NYXL had some sort of chance, Pelican sent them back to reality. The Outlaws' individual talent proved to be way too much in this series because Pelican's Tracer absolutely dominated them. But NYXL, bare minimum, were not totally awful, so maybe there's some kind of positive to take away here if you're a fan. Day 2 started with the Gladiators getting yet another sweep versus a Contenders team. It was pretty much a mirror image to the first one. Control is uncomfortably close, but Map 2 is a breeze. Naga did his best on the Hanzo here, but it wasn't meant to be. Also, we got our first Yaki sighting, so that's fun, I guess. Man's Tracer still goes pretty hard, let's be honest. It's good to see that he's still on top of his game even after that tragic season on New York. Now all warmed up, the Glads took the stage for a second match in a row, this time against the Boston Uprising, where they'd unfortunately lose in a very close 2-0, and do not let that scoreline deceive you. Maps 1 and 2 were pretty much decided by the final fight. In spite of Boston's superior talent on the surface, the Gladiators showed some great resistance. They stuck to their own style, and it worked for them. They knew that having Dante match Smurf in a Winston battle was a bad idea, so they tried to win through other means like Ramatra and even Zarya, and they proved to be good strats that let both Dante and Kai shine. But whenever the series was on the line, it was always Boston clutching up. And really, it's in large thanks to two specific individuals. Twilight for some great sleeps and nano boost to save his teammates, and Birdring for fragging out like he literally never left the league. It's amazing how this guy can drop the game for a year and come back like nothing changed. The man himself in the interview still said that he is learning and improving on Overwatch 2. Isn't it crazy how he can say something like that when he was literally the best player in the lobby? The Boston Uprising had a fun Overwatch League debut that showed off their talents and why they could be one of the best teams in the league. And then Boston took the stage for a second game in a row, and they netted their second 2-0 in a row against Wisp. Through a combination of Boston memeing and actually being caught off guard, Wisp gave them a run for their money on Lijiang Tower. This map was absolute chaos, and we even got the return of Lee Jae Gon Tower as the man literally zoomed across the map with not a care in the world. It was a fun way to cause some chaos on the timeline, and the rest of Boston followed behind by honestly not giving their opponents enough respect. I don't think they accounted for the talents of Wisp here. Chopper and Rocket had some nice highlights that'll definitely help put their names out there. But eventually, Boston did get it into gear, and the rest of the series was pretty uneventful. Moving on to day 3, the Outlaws kicked things off with an interesting W versus Twisted Minds. This one did not go quite as expected, with Houston dropping a map early on, as they decided to experiment / troll, I guess, by playing things like Junker Queen Soldier 76 plus a Pharah Ego duel. Needless to say, if you're trying to match the Pharah team in this situation, you're gonna pay dearly for your choices. After that though, the Outlaws did start carrying, and the series slowly but surely became more one-sided. Shu's Ana went absolutely crazy when he really tried. His damage was off the charts, and his big cooldown connections were the big difference. The scoreline makes it seem like it was way closer than it actually was, but credit to Twisted Minds for having a couple of great moments in this set. Match 2 saw a great Contenders matchup take place between the underdog Wisp and OWL veteran squad Peps. Wisp would end up prevailing in this one in a close 2-0. Experience proved to be less valuable than hard work in this instance. Rocket's Tracer was stupid levels of good, and Abhik deserves a shout for his aggressive Ana positioning. It was definitely hard fought, they didn't win this easily by any means, but Wisp were always the team making the clutch plays. It was obvious that their dive comp was much more refined, and it's a really good W for them. They really did impress a lot this week, and they should feel very proud. In match 3, Redbird played their first match of the week against Twisted Minds. This NA versus EMEA clash proved to be a good one, with Twisted Minds edging out a very close 2-1. Early on, Twisted Minds won as the funny haha Pharah team. But when it came to crunch time in map 3, with everything on the line, they changed up their style and they showed that they can play a mean Ramatra comp. There were some pretty crazy carries out of both sides on the final map. KSA showed us why he used to be an OWL, as his Ramatra went hard, and equally as impressive was Vision. This guy literally soloed on low HP to keep his team in that final map. The deciding factor, though, in this series proved to be ultimate usage. Redbird often overcommitted to win fights, leaving them with a worse economy than Twisted Minds. Their better discipline led the way to EU's first win of the entire Pro-Am. Match number 4 saw the Boston Uprising 2-0 the Washington Justice in a game that's way closer than the score implies. The Justice pushed Boston in a similar light to LA Gladiators. A few fights go differently, and Justice might end up winning this series. Antarctic Peninsula was an absolute slugfest. Washington had a clear-cut plan, and it was going to be to target the Ana. And it proved to be a good strategy that had Boston reeling and trying to adjust mid-set. In spite of Boston's synergy not always being in sync though, it was those individual stars once again making the plays at any given moment that gave them the dub. Washington literally did everything they could. Their coordination was on point in this series, but whenever things were finally going their way, a Decay 3K or Bird Ring Nano Boost ruined their day. Alpha E and Terra were giving it their all, I'm telling you. But unfortunately, it just would not matter. Boston's talent was too much to overcome. And sadly, that remained the theme on King's Row. Washington in all likelihood should have won this map. It went to extra rounds when it just shouldn't have. Washington had spawn advantage on their defense, with everybody dead except Bird Ring and Decay. But then those two proceed to kill all 5. It's literally unfair. The Justice at least made it go to extra rounds, but it's here that Boston put this series to bed with a deep overtime push that Washington had no chance of matching. The Justice played very well against a team with noticeably more talent. It makes you wonder how much longer Boston can sustain getting bailed out by their individuals. I guess we'll see how well that works for them against some of these stronger teams in the tournament next week. On the topic of talent, the NYXL were fully able to show that off in their easy 2-0 against Redbird. Their experience and better skill gave them the edge. Fitz put in the work, even showing a great tracer, and Kellen even took home his first ever player of the match, I believe, in his OWL career. This was a much needed win for NYXL, and proof that they really do have some potential after all. Day 3 concluded with another great showing from Washington Justice. The upset potential we once thought contenders teams had against them died pretty fast here. Wisp had a really impressive week, but this was their worst performance for sure. Flora played like a man possessed. It almost felt pointless to fight against him. Anytime Wisp made progress, Flora canceled it instantly. The sheer number of solo carries on King's Row alone should be illegal. It felt like every fight had him landing headshots with Hanzo or Cassidy. It was just an unfair kind of game in every way that makes you hopeful that he's finally in for a bounce back year. To start the final day, Twisted Minds gave us an upset against the NYXL to give contenders their 4th win against OWL teams in the Pro-Am. With how the two had played up until that point, this was maybe a little surprising. Lambda and UB had a monster day, and the chaotic nature of their general playstyle caused a lot of confusion for a New York team that's maybe still learning how to synergize and communicate properly. This was a really good match, I mean it, one of the better ones of the week. Kellen, Fitz, and Psycho did all they could to make this an even match. I mean, really, it seemed like it was gonna be enough. They had the lead with just a few moments left in map 3. The difference came in one of the last fights. With about 40 seconds remaining, the two sides exchanged big Cassidy pop-offs. The thing is, New York committed all of their bodies to the high ground to try and win that fight convincingly, and while they were busy winning, Twisted Minds had some bodies on the bot uncontested to steal the lead in the final hour. A big credit goes to main support player Nutella for committing what I'd like to think of as a bait sound barrier that completely drew everybody's eyes away from the bot. That one action helped stall for just long enough to get the lead and eventually win the series. This was a big win for contenders, as Twisted Minds was able to finish 3rd in their groups, tying Saints for the best record by a contenders team in the Pro-Am. Match 2 featured Boston and Peps, and it went about how you'd expect. A blowout with no real chance for the Tier 2 roster. With this 2-0, Peps were the only team to not take a single map in the Pro-Am. A pretty disappointing showing for them in the groups and this match, as the most entertaining highlight was when Twilight fell into the well. Just a really quick series with not much to talk about. Next, the NYXL would take a 2-0 loss to Toronto Defiant. The winner of this one was going to move out of the groups, so congrats to Toronto. Honestly, The NYXL did show some good fight at the start of the series, as Nepal was fun and very winnable. The rush comp once again looked really good, and Kellen generally played like an animal. It's just that Toronto's synergy and teamwork is currently miles ahead of theirs. Toronto made the better adaptations, and it led to a pretty easy match-clinching King's Row push by the time we got to the end of this series. Their playmakers did a lot more down the stretch, with Kalugin speedily going all over the enemy DPS. It was a valiant effort from New York, but clearly they have some work to do. And then came one of the greatest moments in the history of professional Overwatch, but for all the wrong reasons, of course, when the Outlaws 2-0'd Redbird. Right from the jump, Houston set the tone that this was not going to be an ordinary match. Right off the rip, they break out a Pelican Pharah, followed by Fearless Hog, Violet Moira, and a Happy Widow. You have Violet and Happy diving the backline while Fearless literally goes out there and just feeds on the Hog. And eventually it got to the point where it felt like a round of mystery heroes where neither team seemed to care. You've got Fearless going spin to win on ball, with Gig trying to catch him mid-air with a shatter. You got Violet DPSing on the Moira, and Happy randomly swapping to Pharah and having it work somehow. This map was absolute madness, and you'd think the tomfoolery would be out of everyone's system by now, but you'd be mistaken. In fact, it was only getting started, cause on Hollywood things got even sillier. First, Happy absolutely styled on attack, just not giving anyone a chance on the other side a chance to play the game, with random ricochet arrows on the Hanzo, and even 3Ks on Widow. Houston absolutely destroyed on their attack, so then it evolved into Redbird's descent into madness, as on their attack, they humbly requested a Widow Hog ego duel. The Hog is one thing, right? That's a pretty silly thing for both tanks to play, but if you're Vision, you must have a death wish if you are willingly requesting a Widow duel with Happy. And by the time they walked out of the spawn doors, Redbird was playing Hog, Widow, Moira, Torb. As you can imagine, the end result made you lose some brain cells. From Fearless teabagging Gig to Violet Moira dueling Renko, this probably had every element of a bronze Mystery Heroes lobby that you could ever ask for. Redbird embraced the memes alongside Houston instead of pointlessly trying to win, which I respect. You gotta give it up to both teams for doing what they did in this series, because otherwise it would have been a boring match. Amazing for all of the wrong reasons, I'd say, but I do highly recommend watching this game if you wish to sit back, relax, and turn your brain off as you watch something a little different. Now with all of the silliness out of our system, we had the main event. The Washington Justice versus the LA Gladiators. This felt like it could be a really good game, and it very much delivered, with everything on the line, the winner of this moving on from Group C. It started with LA Gladiators striking early on Antarctic Peninsula. It was extremely close, with both Dante and Kevster running rampant on one end, and BenBest Ryan going big on the other. But in the decisive round 3, Dante and Kevster just found too many kills. But then on map 2, the Justice bounced back in convincing fashion as Flora continued to show that King's Row should be renamed to Flora's Row. Although another big factor definitely came through the Justice bullying the LA backline. BenBest and AlphaYi just kept going after Lastro's Ana this entire map with no real punishment from the side of LA. Lastro died a staggering 16 times on King's Row, so kinda easy to see why the Justice took this one. But much like the Sam substitution discussed earlier in this video, Washington made a choice people are going to talk about. In a critical map 3, with a tournament spot on the line, the Justice subbed in Mirror to play Winston. BenBest was doing just fine up until this point, so this move is naturally going to get some community backlash. But like the Sam thing, this sub was likely predetermined. So while controversial and definitely questionable, this was likely going to happen no matter what. And honestly, with how Kevster and Kai played, BenBest being in there may not have even made a difference, but regardless, we'll never get to know, so it certainly is a sour way to end the series. Regardless, the Glads took the dub and punched their ticket to the playoff next week. From there, the Week 2 qualifiers concluded with a pointless smacking from Toronto onto Redbird. UV, Hydron, Sam, and Wheats got to flex on their former team, but that's about all there was to watch out for. We got a couple more good highlights out of Vision, who was a genuine shining star on Redbird, but he was out there on his own. This just wasn't close at all. Speedily and Hydron pounded, and that was that. A 70% pulse bomb attach rate is just absurd, by the way. Hydron had a really good week, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do in the regular season. And with that, we conclude week 2 of the Pro-Am qualifiers. I hope you enjoyed this little recap if you missed out on the action. The games were fantastic, and this little contenders experiment was definitely a success. Stay tuned for the single elimination tournament this upcoming weekend. And if you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like button and subscribing, as I would greatly appreciate it. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.